The NCAA did a study about 5, 6 years ago now, roughly. Don't quote me exactly, but roughly in that area. Um, and it was on Division I athletes, all sports, all genders, both genders. Um, and the idea was they were going to do a mental health survey on Division I student athletes, with the assumption, actually, that they would report at a lower amount around depression and anxiety because they're inherently, quote unquote, mentally tougher because of what it means to be a collegiate athlete. And what the NCAA found was that that they were actually reporting at twice the level that general population students were reporting. So if general population right around 20%, which is very normal in the college age group, college athletes were about 40 to 50% had reported that they were either depressed or had anxiety over the last 6 months.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will help you get better at teaching and leading so that you can develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with Stu Singer. If you haven't had a chance to listen to part 1 yet, I'd recommend going back and listening to that first. Stu has worked as a performance psychology coach for over a decade. He has worked in the WNBA, NBA, NCAA Division I, MLS, NWSL, and with men's and women's soccer national team members, as well as USA Olympic gold medalists. He has been an integral staff member for a 2019 WNBA World Championship, 2 Final Fours, 5 Big Ten championships, 9 NCAA Tournaments, a Conference USA Championship, and an Atlantic 10 Championship. His most notable work includes his roles with the Washington Wizards, Washington Mystics, University of Maryland, Ole Miss University, Rice University, and multiple individual athletes from around the world's top leagues. His approach focuses on teaching and providing mental performance skills for athletes that have the pressures of competing at elite levels of sport. In part 2 of this conversation, we talk about how to help athletes navigate stress and anxiety, what coaches really need to understand about performance psychology, and how to help athletes whose stress response system has taken over. If you enjoy the episode and want a copy of the podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details. And if you're interested in learning more about what we offer coaches, go to cuttingedgecoach.com. Now to part 2 of my conversation with Stu Singer. Enjoy the episode. You know, you talked about anxiety and stress, and that being something that occurs in that place where there's high demand and low support. And I don't think it's any secret that athletes today, I mean, this generation, anxiety is real and rampant, and there's lots of factors. But I would love to just know your thoughts on, how can coaches help athletes develop some skills to deal with anxiety and stress? Because even in an environment where there is high support and high demand, there will still be anxiety and stress that they feel either from the sport or from their life. So as coaches, and especially maybe coaches who, they don't have the resources to hire a sports psychologist or bring someone in, like, how do we help athletes build those skills to handle anxiety and stress?
Yeah. Can we break that down a little bit into, like, I think what I would manageably see that as? So first, let's just understand this, that the environment that we create is just one environment. In fact, maybe especially at the high school level or middle school level, it's a small environment in their overall life. They have of course, their family life, they have their educational day. Both of those are bigger than the time that we spend. And then they have their social world, and potentially that's more hours out of the week than us. So there's a lot of environments that we do not control. So the idea that we're going to completely manage anxiety, stress, is, we can help for sure. And being a great role model and a great adult in a young person's life matters deeply, but we do not own it on our own. So I think it's one thing that we just have to know and accept, that it's our job to control the environment that we create, but also know that it may unfortunately not quite be enough. Okay, so that's one part. The other part is that the general population reports, anxiety and depression roughly at about 10 to 20% of the general population. The NCAA did a study about 5-6 years ago now, roughly. Don't quote me exactly, but roughly in that area. And it was on Division I athletes, all sports, all genders, both genders. And the idea was they were going to do a mental health survey on Division I student athletes, with the assumption, actually, that they would report at a lower amount around depression and anxiety, because they're inherently, quote unquote, mentally tougher because of what it means to be a collegiate athlete. And what the NCAA found was that that they were actually reporting at twice the level that general population students were reporting. So if general population right around 20%, which is very normal in the college age group, college athletes were about 40 to 50% had reported that they were either depressed or had anxiety over the last 6 months. And it was like a little bit shocking, because they were like, wait a second, this is completely not matching up with what our hypothesis was, which was why all of a sudden the conversation around student athlete mental health became a little bit more, you heard a little bit more about it, and you heard a little bit more resources moving towards that. And it really came out of that study. So I would actually guarantee that about a minimum of about 20% of your student athletes at the high school, college, or probably college as well, but middle school, high school level, and college, and probably professional, are actually suffering from clinical levels of depression or anxiety. So before we did anything, that you have at least that baseline, because it's kind of normal for any population, any grouping. All right. So what do we do? So understanding like what in particular is stress, which would be on the, what we would call, normal, but not at a clinical level. And then anxiety, which would be then a clinical level of deeper stress, high level of stress, would be. And so, the trigger typically is the what if that's going on in our minds. What if I fail? What if I embarrass myself? What if I'm not good enough? But it's the what ifs. And depending upon how much we focus on it, how deeply we feel it, will move from, that's a stressful experience or a stressful question that we ask ourselves, into maybe even clinical levels of it. Certainly, if it's just sport connected, so it's just around sport, like, am I going to win? Am I going to make a team? Am I going to be a starter? Am I going to, whatever? Then it wouldn't be like necessarily clinical levels, but it would definitely be acute to the sport. And so our job, as much as we possibly can, is continually create a normalcy around, hey, of course, that's what our mind wants to do. It wants to get out and predict what's going to happen. It's thinking, it's not even it's thinking, but it's the goal of that is to prevent discomfort. Okay. But we can't, right? Like we can't predict what's going to happen. We have no way of doing that. So it's like an ineffective system, yet it's deeply built into us. So there's really no way around it. And so what our job is to continually stay present with them. So if, it's our job to not use language that says, hey man, we got to win these next 3 games. No, we don't. We have to have a great practice today. Right? Saying we have to win the next 3 games now puts them out into the future. Now they're thinking about, and 3 games at a time instead of just 1 game at a time, and then maybe 1 practice at a time, maybe 1 hour of our practice at a time. but teaching them how to focus their attention on the stuff that there's a little bit deeper control over. Once we start using language that gets them out into the future, it starts a predictive mind. The predictive mind is usually stressed out and or anxious, and that can go anywhere from, like I said, that just normal kind of butterflies type of stress to what we would call more clinical levels of it.
As you were talking about the what ifs and that being the trigger, it just hit me too how, and with all of this, coaches, we're not immune to it either. And I bet that 20% of coaches are experiencing those same levels, if not higher. And the narratives that run in our mind affect us in similar ways that it affects our athletes. Right? What if I lose this game? What if I get fired? What if these parents are frustrated? They're like, what if? And so I think that what you said there is so powerful and important, but it's important for us as coaches to recognize when we have those narratives and those questions in our mind.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I just this past weekend was fortunate. There's a great AAU program, national AAU program called Pro Skills Basketball that I'm a big fan of, been working with and connected to for a number of years now. And they had their leadership summit this past weekend, and they asked me to come and speak to their coaches, but they didn't ask me to come to speak to their coaches so that they could help their players. They asked me to come to speak to their coaches to help themselves. Like literally, you need to understand all this. You need to practice daily ways of what we would call mental fitness or maybe mental hygiene, so that we're not waiting for breakdown. We're not waiting for creating faulty narratives that end up hurting us as leaders first. And then what happens with that is we then start coaching with those narratives, and we start coaching with that stress, and it doesn't need to be there. And so that was the goal of it. And it was a really great room. It was a great experience. The conversations were phenomenal. And if I'm being totally honest, to me, the coaching world is in dire need of understanding performance psychology, real performance psychology, not great quotes, and not great videos, and not great one time I read a book and I really liked it, but really an understanding and a deep dive, and a deep enough dive that you acknowledge your own demons, because we all have them. And once you have some mastery as a coach, then you can start to teach others. But so many coaches are coaching as they were coached, with the same messages that they received by their coaches and or their parents. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, they didn't know about the right stuff either. And so that's kind of like passing down some of these coaching cliches that don't sound bad, by the way, and are certainly meant intentionally to be good. The intention is positive, but they're actually passing down some of these ineffective and unhelpful focuses that actually unintentionally lead into deeper stress, potentially fear of failure, like we started with. And so if you're asking me, obviously I'm a bit biased, but I think that's the place for us to start.
Yeah, and I'm sure that we could spend a lot of time digging into that, but I would love if you just shared maybe, I don't know, a few of the top things that coaches really need to understand around performance psychology. Maybe what are some of the misconceptions that they commonly hold about it, and what are some of the, like you said, like this is actually what it is, and what are those things that we need to understand?
I would start with the idea that unfortunately, young people, period. So even as parents, you have some young kids, so remember this, is that they actually watch us more than they listen to us. So our actions are much more impactful than our words. So as a head coach, if you want composed players when there's bad calls, when the other team goes on an 8-0 run and you're flipping out, you can say whatever you want. They see your actions. They see what this means to you. They're going to take that on. Okay. So, so I would say that understanding our own actions and behaviors and the impact that we have is massive. The other thing that I would say is that remember this, that we're instinctually driven, and we're instinctually driven, number one, by the idea of survival. And so what's the mechanism for survival is fear. Like, so that's the trigger response we have. If we're surviving and thriving, we love it. It's a dopamine shot. We're happy. But the other side is when we're not, it's going to appear through the idea of fear. And it's super fast and super powerful. So we really can't get out in front of it. And we don't really need to. It serves a purpose. There's, it's not inherently bad. But we need to understand that about ourselves, and then we need to understand that about our athletes. So in that moment where they're not doing well, you have to see, like, are they redlining? Is their nervous system high? Because if their central nervous system is high, it's actually our job to help counterbalance that. So if they're in a moment where you could tell they're high, again, I'm using a lot of basketball, but we can do this in any sport, but your team just gives up a 10-0 run and you call the timeout to stop the bleeding, but you call them over and you just start going nuts on them, you're actually wasting your timeout because they're already in high fight or flight. They're already there. So all you're doing is hitting the gas pedal even harder and faster. So our job actually in that moment is to be the balance point. And I just feel like these are all the things that we have to be intentional about as a master coach, not as hey, I'm just winging it coach, but a master coach understands, like, I have to read this situation. Now, vice versa, the other team goes on a 10-0 run and it's because your team's flat and look like they're lackadaisical, don't care. Then maybe you do light into them a little bit and try to hit the gas pedal in a timeout. But you have to read that. What do they need? Not what do you need to feel and express for you to feel good, but what do you need to give them so that they can kind of get back to even. I could go on to actually too many things that I think that we need to understand. I always say, I tell my athletes all the time, I have no hacks and I have no tricks. Mental skill, if anything's a skill, it takes time and effort and energy to get better at. And I would say that mental skill work fits exactly into that. If you want to get better at this as a coach, or you want to get better at it as an athlete, you have to invest in it. You're going to do it right. You're going to do it wrong. You need feedback. We need to course correct. We need to try again. We need repetition. We need consistency. Sounds almost exactly like skill development, right?
Yeah, because it is skill development, like you said.
It is.
I'd love to go a little bit deeper into, like you mentioned, you mentioned the situation of, your team is getting beat. Maybe their survival instinct is kicked in, but let's talk about maybe, you have an individual athlete on your team who they're dysregulated, their survival instinct is kicked in. Either maybe they're frustrated or maybe they're shut down. I don't know, but how can coaches better handle those situations? Are there questions we should be asking? Are there things we should be doing when we recognize that an athlete is in, that unhelpful survival state? And how do we help bring them back?
Yeah, there are probably about 2 or 3 things that I would mention right off the bat. I think one of the things that we don't spend enough time with, period, in the world, actually the world of any, whether it be education, whether it be business, and certainly athletics, is understanding, and it's going to sound so simplistic, but breathing. A real deep breath, which is the way I teach it, is 6-1-7. So an inhale of 6, where you're really feeling your lungs and your belly fill and rise. Hold it for 1, and then a full exhale out for a count of 7. And the key in all this is that your exhale is longer than your inhale. Longer exhale creates calm. And so that's so just super simple. We underutilize just how powerful the physiological change of a deep breath can create. It literally is a trigger to calm in our system. So, it's most simplistic. Don't even have to use words. I mean, beyond take a deep breath and really teach them what a deep breath means, is like 101. Like that's step number 1. Everybody can do it. Anybody can learn it. Let's do that. That's step 1. Step 2 is, though, that stress and anxiety is always in the unreasonable, right? So like we're really playing poorly, which means I'm never going to play well again. We're never going to win. There's no way. And it's like this, it becomes so big and it becomes unrealistic, and it's not really based in reality. And so just, having a question like, hey, who you guarding? Oh, I got number 30. Okay. Is he right hand, left hand? Oh, he's right-handed. Okay, so where do we play? Oh, we're going to overplay his right. Just real factual reality, right here, right now, controllable questions are going to trigger in a little bit, like getting out of that, high fight or flight mind and coming back down to present moment, stuff that's in my control, which can allow us to kind of reconnect with the concrete thoughts and mind. And honestly, those are the most simplistic, quick, things that we can do for an athlete in the moment. Bigger picture. Don't want to make this oversimplified. Even with that, if we haven't proactively discussed these things, if we haven't proactively spent just a little bit of time with, they can be hard to click in those biggest, most chaotic, stress-filled moments. Okay, so those are good. I guarantee that those are solid. But if nobody's proactively done anything, it's almost like, well, if someone's shooting poorly in the middle of the game and they come over and you're like, okay, well, listen, you really, really, really need to keep your elbow in and your follow through high. Well, maybe, but like, why haven't we been working on that proactively, up to this point? It's going to be hard to make that adjustment in the middle of the game. So it's, to me, again, I want to connect it with the idea of skill development and skill application.
I think that's such an important question. Are you proactively spending time on these things? Because like you said, if we haven't, in the moment, if we try to say, hey, let's do a quick 6-1-7 breath here. 1, they're like, I don't know what that means. And 2, they're like, stop. You've never cared about trying to help me regulate and calm before this moment.
And now all of a sudden I'm going to have this session with you right now. It's just nothing about it and even that, if you say take a deep breath to someone, it's probably going to look a lot like this.
Yeah.
That's not a deep breath. So especially in a game when their heart rate's already up and their breathing is actually not just normal and mellow breathing to begin with. So the idea of practicing that ahead of time is so important and probably really, really underutilized. In fact, definitely underutilized.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved the questions that you mentioned too, just questions to bring them back to the present moment. What's going on right here in front of you? Because like we talked about earlier, with our athletes, with us as coaches, our mind, it just races with stress and anxiety. And we start telling ourselves these stories. Actually, as you were sharing that and talking about those things, I just remembered a situation from a couple seasons ago with a 9th grader who I don't even remember what exactly happened in the first half of our game. It might have been that he got a technical or he kind of shut down regardless of what it was, he started doing some things that weren't what we had set as the expectation, the standard for our team. And we start to head back out for the second half. And he is like lagging behind and he's just in tears. And I went over to him and just asked, what's going on, man? And it was a combination of, he wasn't playing as well as he thought he could, but then also the real reason, he was like, I let my teammates down. And then I don't remember exactly what I asked him, but it was something along the lines of like, that's in the past. What can we do now? Like, what do your teammates need from you now? Yeah. And for him just and there was a shift, like, okay, all that I can do is now in this present moment. I need to go out there and do X, Y, and Z. I think that's so important for us to ask them questions that they can actually control and that are future oriented. It's like, and he knew it too, right? It's like, I could have talked about, man, you did X, Y, all these things wrong in the past. But like, what good would that have done? It just keep him in that state instead of shifting his mind to, all right, what's in the present moment? What do I need to do in the future? And so I think that's something that, as coaches, we've got to take away and do. It's like, let's use questions that help them stay present.
And let me just say, that's perfect, pretty much. Like, that's exactly what you want to do. That is what I always refer to as simple but not easy. Right? Your direction to him is, hey, what can you do right now? Perfect. He may even be able to name what it is. Flipping the switch from like, man, I really screwed up. Man, I let them down. What are they thinking? What do they think of me? What if we lose by 2 and it was the technical that I got? It's not the norm to be able to flip out of that. It's not the norm. And so the brain literally in a scenario like that is going to be flip-flopping from replay to pre-play. What if that is what loses this game? That's pre-play. That's prediction, the what if question. Then it's like, oh man, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I did that. That's where the mind wants to stay. So the idea of letting go of the first half and locking into what you said, I got to give that young man credit. Like, you did a good job as the adult, the leader. But if he was able to toggle back to right here, right now, I'm very impressed with him as well. That's because that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. It's not a natural thing to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, it's hilarious. As you were just talking about that, I just had this flashback to when I was in high school and an athlete. And here's the situation. We were down late in the game and I was playing on the JV team at the time. We had won every game that season. I think it was our last game or one of our last games. We really wanted to go undefeated. High school boys really care about that.
Yeah.
And we're down with, maybe a minute left and it was time to start fouling. And so, I go in to try to foul the guy that's dribbling it and or steal it. And a really normal basketball play, and I get hit with an intentional foul. And everyone was just in shock. I was in shock and looked at the ref, just like arms up, and he called this intentional. And I just turned around and I didn't say anything, but I just like threw my fist in the air when I turned around the other direction. And the other ref teed me up. And so now they're going to the line for 4 free throws. They get the ball back. We lose the game. And I'm just a wreck after. I mean, what you said, like the replay, I just cost us this game. The whatever, the forward too of like, what does everyone think now? My coaches, all those things that go through our mind in a situation like that. That's what I was thinking. It's like, man, I still remember like sitting in a classroom after that game and I can still replay that event, just like I told you, in my mind perfectly. And so, I think it's so important just for us as coaches to understand
that scenario is 100%. Like, that's a norm. That's a real scenario. It happens, some similar stuff happens. And everything that you just described, the flood of stuff, is like literally pretty much it wasn't like you were somehow abnormal to experience it that way. You were very normal for experiencing it that way. That's the shit that as coaches, as leaders, is our job to deeply understand, control ourselves first, get in control of our internal world as best as we possibly can, and then help them to understand that they are, instead of the veneer of perfection and the veneer of nothing bothers us as athletes, that within itself creates more stress and anxiety. Okay, because we can't be real. Once we can kind of be like real about it, but then work on it proactively, created in an environment that understands it, that's where we're going to help move people forward.
That's powerful. Well, Stu, this has been fantastic. I have a few quick rapid fire questions for you. Would just love to know your answer based on the coaching you do with coaches and athletes. And then I'll give you a chance to share with the audience where they can connect with you. My first question is this: the most fun part of coaching is?
I would say the building of the relationships and the connection of the relationships, and then seeing like people flourish beyond potentially what they thought, and or at least reaching the things that they wanted to reach. To me, that's what it is.
That's awesome. Here's the next one. I wish I would have known blank before I started coaching.
I was always interested in performance sports psychology, but I did coach. The way this all began was that I was a coach. I started as a coach first, and then went deeper. But if I had to do it all over again, man, I wish I would have known the stuff that I understand so deeply now then. I think I was really in tune with it, but it was a little bit more like, well, what did, Phil Jackson do? What did Dean Smith do? What did, it was like always, I was just always bringing in like all this like hodgepodge of thoughts and information, rather than like understanding at its real core and being able to apply that. I wish I would have had that earlier.
Yeah, that's awesome. And hopefully there's some things in this episode that coaches can have that baseline knowledge that you wish you would have had when you started. Here's my last one. I know I'm successful as a coach when?
I think it goes back to the discussion that we had, is like when I know that the people I'm working with like deeply trust me, I trust them, and that there's a real authentic care. Everything else, I promise, will build from that. But in those moments where you just know, like, I'm saying things right now that they don't want to hear, and yet they're willing to hear them because there's something deeper there, I think that's when you know there's some success.
That's beautifully put, and I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that trust is there. And to tie it back, we can be demanding and supportive. They trust us enough to get outside their comfort zones and grow. Stu, this has been fantastic. A lot of value for coaches. Before we hop off, just share with them how they can connect with you or see your work.
Yeah, I'm at Well Performance on Twitter, and I am Well Performance on Instagram. Those are the places that I share the most content. I do have an app that I created for athletes, but also for coaches, I would say. Anybody actually that wants to perform better. And it's called DoSo, DoSo, one word. And it's in the App Store. And I created a coaching, sports performance psychology course for coaches. That's linked to my Twitter account and to my Instagram account. And it's for coaches to do that deep dive into understanding themselves first, and understanding it from the inside out, so that then they can begin to really help their athletes as well.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and thanks again to Stu for joining me. As always, if you enjoyed this episode and you want to grab a copy of the podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast. I've got 2 takeaways from part 2 of this conversation. First, we must create normalcy around fear and struggle. It's absolutely essential if we want to help athletes embrace struggle and navigate fear and anxiety. And second, we must give our athletes actual skills to navigate moments of stress and anxiety. Be proactive about it. Don't wait until those moments arrive when they actually need the skills. Teach them beforehand. Like I mentioned in the intro, if you want to learn more about how we serve coaches, go to cuttingedgecoach.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.